Hello, the title of the talk is The Logic of Ungrounded Payoffs. Consider the following statements. Anna wished Bob and Tom wouldn't always prefer the same toys. Berta likes the fact that her son likes reading more than watching TV. I like the fact that Fabio likes what I like. Ronnie prefers not to have such a strong preference for chocolate. The boyfriend says, I'd like to do whatever you want to do. Whereas his estranged lover thinks, oh, but right now I prefer doing whatever it is that you hate. As these examples show, second and even higher order wants, preferences, and desires are a normal part of our life, although sometimes they get us into trouble. The so-called paradox of desire is a case in point. I desire not to have the desires I do have. But there are others. There is a particularly damaging combination of higher order likes and preferences in the context of games, which results in players having ungrounded or paradoxical payoffs. Let me illustrate this situation with an example. Suppose row and column are invited to a party and are told to bring cheese and wine respectively. Row can choose among a variety of types of cheese and column among types of wine. Row likes any particular combination of cheese and wine exactly to the extent that column does. He thinks column is more knowledgeable on these matters. But then Row comes to believe that, according to column, it is Row's judgment, the one we should trust. Moreover, suppose the situation is symmetrical for column. Then their utility functions are interdependent, and it is not obvious how to fix a matrix to represent the interaction of the two agents in game-theoretic terms. The interdependence of payoffs in these and similar examples springs from a peculiar and fortunate combination of second-order attitudes, both of preferences and beliefs. Call a particular combination of wine and cheese a strategy profile. Row likes strategy profile A if and only if Row believes column likes it as well. Actually, in case Row likes A, what Row likes about A is that column likes it. So Row likes A in case he does, because he likes the fact that column likes A. We could even conjecture that Row would prefer that column's preferences do not in turn depend on his own, but alas, Row believes that they do. So this is our example for the simplified case in which players only consider 2 brands of cheese and 2 brands of wine. We really don't know these guys here. We don't know whether X or Z is a very high payoff or very low or just a mediocre result. And actually, there is no way to know. It is objectively undetermined. The claim that agents with interdependent utility functions might fail to have a matrix requires some explanation. Possibly the clearest examples involve what we may call perfect altruists or perfect lovers, as I will call them here, and perfect haters. To simplify, suppose players can only obtain maximum or minimum payoff, say 10 or 0, okay? In other words, outcomes are either maximally preferred or maximally dispreferred. Say perfect altruist obtains maximum payoff from an outcome if and only if she believes her partner also obtains maximum payoff. Whereas perfect haters obtain 10 if and only if they believe their partners obtain 0. Then a couple of perfect altruists could have any matrix in which cells are pairs of payoffs of the form 10-10 or 0-0, whereas a couple of perfect haters could have any matrix in which payoffs are of the form 10-0 or 0-10. Thus, for example, if row and column have two strategies each, their resulting 2x2 matrix for two perfect altruists could be any of the 16 possible matrices we can build out of 10-10 or 0-0 cells. As payoffs are ungrounded, the matrix is radically underdetermined. On the other hand, there is no pair of payoffs that can reflect an interaction between a perfect altruist and a perfect hater. So they cannot have a matrix in the first place, at least when agents have only maximally preferred or dispreferred outcomes. So in this case, payoffs are not only ungrounded, but paradoxical. The upshot is that not all interactions can be described in game-theoretic terms. Sometimes agents are just not playing a game in any interesting game-theoretic sense. In previous work, I suggested that pairs of perfect altruists or haters, what I call here homogeneous couples, get involved in a second-order game in which they seek to coordinate the matrix of their first-order interaction. Players are able to fix a matrix if and only if they reach a Nash equilibrium in their second-order game. If they fail to reach a Nash equilibrium there, the modeling of the first-order interaction fails as well. We can say that it was not a proper game after all. Now, this approach requires the assumption that players agree on the set of matrices available to them to play a first-order game. And such an agreement can only occur if players are of the same type, so to speak. This is impossible for mixed couples of lovers and haters. Here I will relax this assumption. How can we think of the process by which players try to fix a matrix then, in the context of ungrounded payoffs? I will seek to model this process with the aid of a dynamic logic for doxastic and preference change. So my main goal here is to reconstruct the logical process by which players caught up in ungroundedness look for a suitable matrix without presupposing that agents agree beforehand on the set of possible matrices. And to do this, I will rely on a system of dynamic logic with enough resources to express the beliefs and preferences of the agents. I will follow closely some of the ideas pioneered by Van Bentham and Liu. Formally, the system I favor departs from older proposals only in minor respects, but the application is novel and will help us identify some links between higher-order attitudes and games. So very sketchily, the project goes as follows. I will start by defining a multi-agent Kripke model for a possible two-person game. The possible worlds discriminate among different strategy profiles and pairs of payoffs. I will also define relations between worlds, which capture the behavior of a belief and a preference operator of the language. The preference relation of each player will be determined endogenously, so to speak, on the basis of particular features of the worlds, namely the payoffs. In a way that will be clear soon, I hope. And in addition, players should be able to upgrade their beliefs as a result of various inputs. Intuitively, players succeed in having a matrix if, as a result of successive upgrades, and for at least one strategy profile, they both end up believing that they are in the same world. This may fail to happen either because of lack of coordination or because of deeper impossibility. In such cases, the verdict is that the agents are not playing a game in any possible world. Part of our task will be to investigate conditions under which a sequence of upgrades comes to an end and conditions under which a loop is guaranteed to occur. Now, this is important. I want to emphasize that this project does not attempt to reconstruct the reasoning of the players within a game. In particular, it does not attempt to reconstruct the logical process that leads players to reach a Nash equilibrium. Now, this is important because there is by now a well-established tradition that uses dynamic logic to model games. Yes, in the work of Oliver Roy, Eric Backwit, and many others. But what I will do today is different. I mean, in the neighborhood, of course, but still different. Recall that our agents are not yet playing a game. And indeed, they might end up discovering that playing a game is an impossible task under the circumstances. For the rest of the talk, I will continue to refer to the fate of perfect lovers and haters to make examples more concrete and easier to grasp. But recall anyway that ungroundedness is not an exclusive phenomenon of altruistic or spiteful attitudes, as we have seen with the cheese and wine example. Okay, let me introduce first the concept of an underspecified game. It is pretty much like a game, except for a few items we'll review in a moment. So it is a tuple where we have a set of players. I will refer to them indistinctly as players, agents, or actors. We have also sets of strategies, one set for each agent. And a strategy, as usual, is a fully specified course of action for the player. And a strategy profile is a tuple of strategies. Then we have a set of utility functions, which range from strategy profiles to sets of real numbers. So we have sets here rather than unique numbers, and this is what makes the game underspecified. And finally, R is a possibly empty set of restrictions which provide constraints on tuples of payoffs. So pi determines a space of possible matrices, which may be made smaller by the set of restrictions, and the restrictions capture the way in which each player thinks her own utility function interacts with the functions of others. And so they jointly determine a set of admissible matrices for the players. All this may become clearer with a concrete example. So here we go. Let's focus on a family of particular underspecified games, G, with G in lowercase, with players 1 and 2. The idea is that the players will be either two perfect lovers or two perfect haters or one-on-one. And say strategies are A1, B1, and A2, B2. To simplify the notation, lowercase a, b, c, and d will refer to the 4 resulting strategy profiles, and payoffs are again 0 or 10. We stipulate that the restrictions can be of 2 types, depending on whether the agent is a perfect lover or a perfect hater, in the following way. Perfect lovers restrict matrices to those with cells with equal payoffs. Perfect haters restrict matrices to those with cells with unequal payoffs. So homogeneous couples of perfect lovers or perfect haters restrict the set of all possible matrices, which would have been 256 56 for 2 possible payoffs, to 16. This is something we had noticed before. Whereas the constraints imposed by a mixed couple cannot be jointly satisfied for values 0 and 10. And hence, in this case, the space of admissible matrices is empty. There is no matrix at all. Now we introduce a language to describe our agents in G in the usual way. We want a belief operator and also a preference operator. And to simplify the notation, I've also added that this preference operator. As usual, B sub I phi stands for agent I believes that phi. Here, I will only deal with so-called plain beliefs that do not admit of degrees. And I will not seek to analyze how beliefs in this basic sense relate to credences or to more sophisticated or graded accounts. And also note that our agents have a very elementary preference structure because outcomes are maximally preferred or maximally dispreferred. And this simplifies the intended reading of the preference operator, which can be just rendered as agent I, in this case, agent I likes phi. And so this pref phi will simply mean agent I dislikes phi. Of course, we could supplement all this with richer accounts of preference and belief, but nothing important really. Depends on keeping things simple. It's just that at this point, the complications will not pay off and they might obscure what I want to model today. Now we define a model for L. Again, this is pretty standard. We have a set of worlds, a doxastic and preference relation between worlds and evaluation function. A few words about W. Worlds should be able to discriminate at least strategy profiles and pairs of payoffs. So we could represent them as tuples of a profile and a pair of payoffs, as in say 8 and 10 or B 10 0, perhaps indexed tuples, because there might be more than one 8 and 10 world, for example. Now the R's. They are serial, transitive, and Euclidean relations between worlds. So the B operator behaves as in the KD45 model system. This simplifies a bit the plausibility models that are normally offered by dynamic doxastic logic. Intuitively, in this setting, the accessible worlds correspond to the most plausible ones in more sophisticated models. On the other hand, this is the relation between worlds induced by pi. And the idea, which is very straightforward, is that if you have, say, payoff 0 in world S and payoff 10 in world T, then you will think that T is at least as good as S. And finally, P is evaluation function for atomic formulas. Then the evaluation of sentences of L proceeds inductively in the usual way. I think I can skip most of this. The only important observation here is that the clause for pref, for the pref operator, is slightly abnormal. I mean, with respect to the usual way to proceed. An agent prefers that phi or likes phi in a given world W, if and only if phi holds at W, and W is at least as good as any other world, perhaps strictly better. Whereas an agent dislikes phi in a given world W, if and only if, again, phi phi holds at W, but any other world is at least as good as W, perhaps strictly better. These abnormal clauses will require us to modify a few things at the time of providing a full axiomatization for this logic, and at the time of giving consistency and completeness results. But we are not entering into this today anyway, so I will skip it. Now, in the model just defined, an agent is of a certain type if she can access certain worlds and not others. That is to say, if she deems possible that the actual world is a world in which certain preferences hold and not others. So a type can be partially described by a collection of statements that mention beliefs and preferences. Let's start by perfect lovers. Perfect lovers can only access 0, 0, or 10, 10 worlds. Now, let's P be strategy profile A holds. Let me refer to the set of worlds in which A holds. So to prefer that P means that you like A worlds. Okay. So an agent will not believe of herself that she prefers a given strategy unless she also believes that the other prefers it as well, and that the other believes that he prefers it. So she believes that she prefers both the strategy profile and that the other guy prefers it, which entails that if she believes that she prefers that P, then she prefers that the other guy prefers that P. Perfect haters, on the other hand, can only access 10, 0 or 0, 10 worlds. And in addition, agent I will not prefer a strategy unless I believe that the other guy disprefers it. And unless agent I believes that the other guy believes that he disprefers it, and vice versa. Which entails that agent I believes she likes, if agent I believes that she likes P, then she prefers that the other guy dislikes it, and vice versa. Oops. Now, this is important. A type cannot be fully characterized by a sentence in the object language. And this is because types function both as constraints for accessibility relations, but also as revision schemas in the following sense. Suppose a model is upgraded, we'll see how to do this in a moment, and now there is at least a world in which player I believes that she likes that P, here. But also that J does not like it. Then if I is a perfect lover, we have a problem, okay? Because this cannot be the case. So this will trigger endogenously a new revision. We will come back to this very soon. For more sophisticated settings, we might want to define other types as well, or we may want to consider the possibility that agents do not have a defined type at all, or we might want to allow agents to change their types. All this is possible, but today I will stick to the simpler scenario and assume that first, types are stable, and second, it is common knowledge among the players that players are either perfect lovers or perfect haters. And in light of all this, note that describing the preference relation of an agent requires paying attention to two very different things. Her first-order preferences on strategies, on strategy profiles, and also her higher-order preferences related to types. An agent likes or dislikes worlds depending on whether those worlds are liked or disliked by her partner. This gives us some hints on how the dynamics of the model will go. Well, in any case, before introducing the dynamic analysis, let me illustrate how types interact in a synchronic setting. Consider the following partial rendering of a possible model M for strategy profile A. This diagram is only partial in the sense that I have only included A worlds. This will suffice for present purposes. Here, black lines represent the doxastic accessibility relations of player 1, and red lines those of player 2. Notice that player 1 is a perfect lover and player 2 is a perfect hater. Player 1 can only access worlds Y and Y prime, while player 2 can only access X and X prime. In world W, for example, player 1 believes that both 1 and 2 like A worlds. Okay. However, at world Y, player 1 also believes that player 2, wrongly believes to be in a world player 1 dislikes. That is to say, in world X prime. And this situation repeats in every world. For all worlds, players believe that the other guy is mistaken about the world they are both in. An interesting thing here then is that the actual world is undetermined. And moreover, it is impossible to determine it. Okay, we're now ready to incorporate dynamic aspects to our model. In principle, a doxastic state can change in response to so-called soft information about the strategy the other player is attempting to play or the payoff of the other player under certain strategy profile. As usual, doxastic upgrades can remove some accessibility links and create others. The general picture is the standard one. There are triggers that, in each case, change some of the doxastic relations of at least one of the players, yielding a new revised model. We present now the full formal machinery. Our language should incorporate action expressions for announcements, which act as triggers. Here. Triggers for doxastic upgrades are events in which phi seems to be the case with some degree of uncertainty. We write it like this, up arrow phi. In the new model, the phi worlds become accessible and the not phi worlds become inaccessible. This is the effect of the upgrade. In a more sophisticated setting, we could also incorporate preference upgrades, but we will not need them today. Now, as I have already anticipated, in many interesting cases, the doxastic triggers will be endogenous and will allow for what we may call upgrade cascades. This is what I have in mind. Suppose player I provides verbal or behavioral clues that catalyze a particular initial trigger. So Player I provides indications, for example, that she likes A1 worlds. So this initial input or initial trigger is precisely the soft announcement that player I likes A1 worlds. Now, suppose that J is a perfect lover. Then, okay, J likes the same worlds I likes. As a result of the initial input, now J can only access worlds characterized by, A1 worlds which have maximum payoffs. In other words, the initial input changes J's doxastic relations and determines a second model. But the thing is, this very fact generates a new trigger, an endogenous trigger, namely the soft announcement that J likes A1 worlds. So the new model automatically generates a new trigger endogenously. And this new input may prompt a new change in player I's doxastic structure, depending on I's own type. And therefore it determines a third model. And this may go on, or eventually stop at some point. The upgrade is soft in the sense that players can get things wrong. They can misunderstand, for example, the relevant cues. After the initial input, the sequence of endogenous doxastic changes is determined by the underlying structure of the model until a new external input appears. So let us see the dynamic models in action. Consider, for starters, a pair of perfect lovers. To simplify, assume once again that agents already believe that they are in some A world for some strategy profile A. As usual, this rectangle is meant to represent an equivalence relation. So within these limits, all worlds access every other world. So here, they are both in suspense regarding which A world is the actual world. Now, suppose both agents receive the soft information that the other player likes A worlds. So these are the triggers. Player 1 likes P and player 2 likes P. P, as before, stands for profile A holds. So the trigger prompts an upgrade, as a result of which we obtain the following revised model. The only world the two agents can access now is Y. And this model is stable in the sense that both players found a world which they both believe to be the actual world. So they can go ahead and play the game. Consider now a different scenario. Suppose instead that they both misunderstand the cues and receive the trigger that it seems to be the case that player 1 prefers B, and it seems to be the case that player 2 disprefers B. As a first response to the triggers, the upgrade will lead players here. The player black can only access Y world, the Y world, and player red can only access the Y prime world. But then we can anticipate that the players will be caught up in a loop. Why? They will both change their accessibility relations again, because being perfect lovers, they cannot like or dislike a strategy unless their partner likes it or dislikes it as well. Which brings us to the next graphic. So the previous model generated these triggers. One dislikes B, two likes B. And here we are. I mean, we were here, and now we are here, okay? Now the black player is in W, is in Y prime, and the red player is in Y. Unfortunately, it's easy to see that the players cannot remain here either. This new model again generates new triggers, as a result of which the two players will revert to their doxastic state from the previous model, and then they will go back and forth between the two. This is a sorrow state of affairs for a pair of perfect lovers, but unfortunately, once involved in this cascade, there is no way for them to get out of it unless there is a new external stimulus. The analysis for pairs of perfect haters runs along similar lines. Oops, I think this is better, sorry. Things become more interesting if we have a mixed couple with a perfect hater facing a perfect lover. So this is what we'll review now. A perfect altruist meets a perfect hater. Consider this initial setting. Here, player black is a perfect lover and player red is a perfect hater. Note that so far the setting is stable because there is crucial lack of information. Each player ignores the evaluation of others. Player black believes that red does not know whether black likes A worlds, and vice versa. So players are in state of maximal ignorance within A worlds. The stability is broken as soon as they receive externally more soft information about each other. Now, suppose the initial trigger is that player 2 likes A worlds, likes B. As a result of this, the black player now changes her accessibility relations, and now she thinks she's in world Y. But then the red player has the new input that player black likes B worlds as well. Here's the new input. So the red guy now moves to X. But this provides a new trigger for player black, namely that player red dislikes P. This is a new trigger. So player black now moves to Y prime, which provides a further trigger for the red player. That one dislikes P. As a result of which the red player is now in X prime. And this starts the same sequence of upgrades all over again. In short, we have a loop. As we can see, players will keep on upgrading their beliefs forever. And in each and every upgrade, they are bound to believe that the other player is confused about the actual world. It's not hard to see that mixed couples will generate a loop of upgrades, regardless of the details of the initial trigger, as long as such a trigger suffices to make at least one of the players opinionated on whether she likes or dislikes A worlds for some strategy profile A. So this is what proposition 1 says. This is pretty much a generalization of the example we have seen before. Consider a Kripke model as defined before, where the two agents are fixed but opposite types. Then for any sentence psi, The soft announcement that psi generates an infinite sequence of upgrades if there is at least a strategy profile A and a player J, such that the player is totally opinionated in the new model regarding her preferences for A. The proof can be done by reductio, assuming there is a last model in the sequence, which leads to a contradiction. If we add further expressive resources to the language, we can obtain other interesting results. We should somehow manage to inject some information about structural features of the modeling framework into the object language. To this effect, consider the following definitions. Let the G refer to the proposition that the agents can fix a matrix and play a game, and GM refers to the proposition that the agent can fix a matrix and play a game in model M. The truth conditions for G and GM are more or less straightforward. GM is true in a model if there is some world in that model in which they can play a game, which is to say, if there is some world such that either they both like or they both dislike, in that world, a given strategy profile, or one of them likes it if only the other dislikes it. Then G simplicator is true in a model M. If there is a sequence of upgrades, a path that can take us from M to model N, in which Gn is true in that model, in model N. We can prove that G is true for homogeneous couples, but for heterogeneous pairs of players, G refers actually to the empty set of worlds. It is impossible to instantiate it. The proof goes by induction on N, the number of upgrades. Now, the interesting thing here is to wonder whether agents can come to believe or disbelieve that G is the case. How can we do that? And to capture this idea, we can define first the concept of belief in the limit. The idea is that an agent believes in the limit that phi in a given model M if the agent believes that phi in every possible model that can be reached from M through a sequence of upgrades. So belief in the limit captures the idea that future beliefs sometimes stabilize, so to speak, and remain stable for any upgraded model as further away from the initial model as we want. I mean, for an N that may be as large as we want. We can also recall here the standard definition of common belief. And by analogy with the standard definition of common belief, we have common belief in the limit. Pretty straightforward, I would say. Two agents have common belief in the limit that phi, if they have common belief in the limit, that they have common belief in the limit, that they have, etc., that phi. With the aid of these tools, we can prove the following results. If the agents are of different types, then in every possible upgrade of the initial model, they will have common belief in the limit that they cannot play a game. In other words, heterogeneous pairs of agents can anticipate instability. The proof is again by induction and the number of upgrades from the initial model. On the other hand, recall that in order to play a game, not only should the R's have to have a particular structure, but also the upgrades need to be felicitous. And this may fail to be the case even for homogeneous couples, as we have seen before. So this is our proposition 3. If the agents are of the same type, then in every possible upgrade of the initial model, they will have common belief in the limit that they can play a game. However, for certain initial models, unlucky couples believe in the limit that G, but believe that not Gn in every upgraded model N. This sounds a bit paradoxical, but it is not. And the reason this is consistent is that G is actually stronger than the conjunction of the Gn's that can be accessed by unlucky couples, because the latter depends on the specific details of the specific path of upgrades that actually occurred, not on all possible upgrades. Okay, time to summarize a bit what we have done so far and to conclude. I'd like to start this final section by noticing the following. Being or not being in a game, or being or not being able to fix a matrix, is in many cases a matter of luck. It is an empirical question, at least as much as stumbling on semantic ungroundedness or a semantic paradox can also be an empirical matter. The circumstances that trigger ungroundedness can be knowledge or simply belief about other people's mental state. So sometimes beliefs about other people's mental state can lead to a scenario in which we do not know certain things about ourselves anymore. Namely, we no longer know our payoffs. Now, this is what we have done in this paper. We can mimic the search for a suitable matrix by offering a dynamic logic that can deal with the beliefs and preferences of the agents. Agents upgrade their beliefs as a result of soft learning about the preferences of their partner. And the sequence of models can, but need not, come to an end for pairs of perfect lovers or perfect haters, but not for mixed pairs. Failures to reach a fixed point in the sequence of upgrades can be due either to lack of coordination or, as we have seen, to deeper impossibility. If an infinite loop occurs, what oscillates forever is not a belief about what the actual world is, but the determination of the actual world where a game can take place. And we can draw here more general morals. These results can stimulate further research in at least two different possible directions. On the one hand, we may want to explore a general account of the task of finding the matrix of a game. From the player's point of view, the process of looking for game-theoretic matrices may be recast as a series of model upgrades, even in more standard cases, even if we don't have ungroundedness as we had here. On the other hand, we may want to use these results, the results of this talk, as a first step towards more general account of high-order preferences in the context of doxastic and preference logic. I prefer what she prefers. But if she prefers the opposite of what you prefer, then you cannot prefer that. The sentence describes an impossible world. You may not know that at first, though you may eventually convince yourself that this is so when you upgrade. Interestingly, your coming to know or coming to believe that this is so is a piece of knowledge or a piece of belief on your model dynamics rather than on a specific world, because there is no such world. Thank you.